and they conduct up to quintuple blinded studies on psychic mediums. So I started reading all about their research. I mean, they would have mediums get on the phone and, so they couldn't see the person, which is the significance of the phone. And they would at times have a proxy sitter, someone sitting there just taking all the information and then give it later to the sitter. And it would be accurate. Sometimes they would be giving readings where they couldn't even hear the voice of the person. It would just be a button for yes, no, or maybe. And they had all different types of studies going up to quintuple blinded. And they claimed mediums were getting up to 90% accuracy. And accuracy meant it had to be specific.
Liz, thank you so much for coming on the show. I absolutely love your work. I love your perspective. I just find it so interesting that you are an atheist that is interested in the afterlife. Are people kind of surprised when they find that out about you?
They are. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's not the typical, but when you really start delving in, I mean, a God is not necessary to redefine how consciousness works. Yeah. And I guess I'm not your typical atheist. Like when I look into atheism, it tends to be a default and something not the default. For me, it seems more like the logical default. A lot of atheists tend to be raised religious, really struggled to become atheist, consider it really important to them. For me, I just grew up in a very secular culture. I probably wouldn't have even used the word atheist originally. It was just, it was sort of an irrelevant, like God, heaven, like it just was absolutely not part of my life or culture at all. So I just never gave it much thought.
So for your family growing up, because you described it as secular, was it just that the topic of religion didn't really come up, or were you taught specifically there is no God, we're atheist, humanist, something like that?
Just didn't really come up. Like we're culturally Jewish. My mom was raised Protestant, my dad Jewish. We celebrated all the holidays. I grew up in New York, in Manhattan, and everyone around me was just pretty progressive in terms of that mindset. And it was just, maybe I had some friends who believed in God. It was just, no one ever talked about it. It was just kind of the default. Like, I think it was just totally unimportant, where it was like, if someone asked you, what religion are you? I would not have said I was atheist. I'd say I'm half Jewish, half Christian. And because to me, that was a culture. And, I think it's very different if you grow up in a community where there is more religion. I mean, and I went, a lot of friends, it was a more Jewish than Christian culture. So I went to a lot of bar and bat mitzvahs, and people would say the prayers, and we'd say the Hanukkah prayers, and we'd do Passover Seder, but it all felt cultural. I think it just, if someone was like, oh yeah, I actually really believe in God, I think it just would have been like, you do? Just like surprised. Like I wouldn't have cared,
Yeah.
It just would have been a little surprising. And it just, I think, so it was just kind of irrelevant in a way.
Yeah, I think more people probably feel that way than we know. I think for a lot of people, we grow up with certain labels, like you said, like Catholic, Jewish, whatever, but we might actually just kind of go along with the holidays and, we go to this building and we do a special prayer and not really care about it. So I do think that's more common, but I would love to hear, was there a certain point where you started to question things yourself, whether it was the afterlife, God, whatever?
Yeah, well, I mean, God, it was just a given to me. There wasn't a God, at least not Judeo-Christian traditional religion God. So that wasn't really an option. But my dad passed in 2015, unfortunately. And
I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was horrible. I'm an only child. My family is very close. So it was really crushing. And my dad and I were incredibly close. So my immediate thought, it was just sort of in that desperation. I remember lying with my mom and she's like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we believed in God? And to us, that'd be like, wouldn't it be nice if you believed in the tooth fairy? I mean, yes, it would
Sure.
be nice. It's, you know, and I mean, no disrespect by that for
Yeah,
that. Like,
yeah,
I do not judge if you do. It's just from our mindset. It was
yeah,
like, yeah, that'd be really nice. You know, I mean,
yeah.
and then my next thought, I just started to think like, you know, sort of in grief, if you've had a loss, sometimes
Hmm.
I can't say this was exactly a logical thought or I actually thought it was true, but I thought, is there any possible way for time travel?
Mm.
And could, you know, I was like, you know, and I started to think if we are time traveling, we wouldn't know it. If it was official time traveling, we were jumping around timelines. Part
Hmm.
of going back in time is not having access to the memories
Yeah.
that, you know, we've had since then. So it was a quick thought. And then I started to think, well, all science fiction, not all, but a huge portion of science fiction comes true. If you look at
Hmm.
old science fiction, I mean, everything we've been going through from pandemics to like Zoom, I mean, that's all in it.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, again, time travel, science fiction, could that come true? So I started
Hmm.
to read books on time travel, Einstein's theories of time travel. And
Hmm.
you know what? Time travel is possible. That's the
Hmm.
crazy thing. It's not practical, but
Yeah.
if you were to build a spaceship going close to the speed of light, I'm going to have the exact numbers wrong, but let's say you take two twins and
Hmm.
then one built a spaceship traveling close to the speed of light, they would be, let's say, after 2 years on Earth, they would be, sorry, I'm reversing it. After, let's say, 20 years on Earth, two
Hmm.
years would have passed for the person
Oh,
traveling close to
wow.
the speed of light.
Yeah.
Yes. And that was just incomprehensible to me. I'm like, how?
Yeah.
How?
Yeah.
So it's like something as factual as time isn't as set as we think. What else is there? And that's where I
Yeah.
had my very next thought. And this was just the life changing. My very next thought was, so at this point, without a doubt, I thought consciousness was created by our brain neurons. So I
Hmm.
thought, well, if you really take the concept of eternity, eternal big bangs, big crunches, evolutions of species, complex species, most likely another set of brain neurons would create an experience that got to be a me. Not
Hmm.
Liz, but at least I would have a consciousness. It's a coincidence that it's a me experiencing Liz. So I,
Hmm.
you know, would prefer to get to be someone connected to my dad again and myself and my loved ones. But your only other thought is total obliteration. This seemed like a
Hmm.
pretty good idea.
Yeah.
So I had that thought, and then I thought, well, this is really weird, probably not likely, but if that's true, is there
Hmm.
some way, somehow, any memories have carried over? And I Googled
Hmm.
that, and that's when everything changed because I found two researchers, Dr.
Yeah.
Ian Stevenson, who
Yeah.
has passed away, and his protege, Dr. Jim Tucker, child
Hmm.
psychiatrist at the University of Virginia, child psychiatrists and professors of psychiatry at the University of Virginia, who study cases of kids with past life memories from a very data driven base, and they're getting accurate results. And I was just like, this is the biggest game changer ever. So I read everything about them. And once you find one person
Yeah.
who's like the logical researcher in that world, you find them all because there's a whole department at the University of Virginia. And then you find other researchers. And that was the life changer.
Wow.
So,
So it sounds like it started with just some curiosity, wondering, is it even possible for consciousness or whatever we call us to be, whatever you call you
yeah.
to be, to continue on, or memories to continue on? And you found out that there's actually people studying this. Tell me a little bit about what you discovered in that research, what science can tell us about the afterlife or consciousness going on.
What I found early on or what I have
Yeah.
come to find to this
Well,
day. Okay.
we can go through all
Okay.
of it. I want to hear about the science, but I want to hear about how you changed during this discovery as well.
Okay. So, what I found, first I found that Dr. Jim Tucker and Dr. Ian Stevenson, their research was so thorough.
Yeah.
And I started to read every single book, and I started to try to read skeptics' rebuttals, and the skeptics, I mean, gave rebuttals, but nothing of logic. Essentially
Mhm.
what they said, they either addressed issues that were in Dr. Jim Tucker's and Dr. Stevenson's research, but they clearly had never read it thoroughly,
Yeah.
or they just basically said this isn't true because it isn't true. And
Mhm.
I was just, it seemed to be then that our consciousness, if these memories carry over, our consciousness functions differently than we think. It's not necessarily created by a brain. And again, from finding Dr. Jim Tucker, I found Dr. Bruce Grayson, who studies near-death experiences, which is when someone passes away, has experiences, and is resuscitated. And there seems to be this whole other realm they go to. And it didn't sound like nonsense. I mean, it wasn't, I mean, it had substance to what they said, and also consistency across the board of what people would say. I mean, some differences, but some consistencies. And then I found a lot of research being conducted on psychic mediums. And from there, I found Dr. Julie Beischel and Mark Bacuzzi, who are the co-founders of the Windbridge Institute. And they conduct up to quintuple blinded studies on psychic mediums. So I started reading all about their research. I mean, they would have mediums get on the phone and, so they couldn't see the person, which is the significance of the phone. And they would at times have a proxy sitter, someone sitting there just taking all the information and then give it later to the sitter. And it would be accurate. Sometimes they would be giving readings where they couldn't even hear the voice of the person. It would just be a button for yes, no, or maybe. And it just, I mean, they had all different types of studies going up to quintuple blinded, and they claimed mediums were getting up to 90% accuracy. And accuracy meant it had to be specifics. They couldn't say, like, you have a great grandfather, they loved you.
Right. They miss you. They're here with you.
Yeah.
The basics.
Right.
Oh, wow. So, I mean, there's so much research here. There's so much science behind this. What I would love to hear is, as you were diving into this, did you start to kind of have an idea of what consciousness actually is? Because I think that's the part that's so mysterious for atheists or for theists or for anybody in between. Like, what is consciousness?
And that is the question. And nobody, not the smartest person in the world, can answer that. It's just absolutely, I mean, there's definitions. It seems to be an awareness. And then and this is me speaking for myself, and maybe this is some stuff I've read and have processed. So, if I might be quoting other people and not realizing it, because I'm sure like I've read so much on this, but that I've kind of digested it and taken it in as my knowledge at this point. So, so consciousness is basically an awareness of you, an awareness of others around you, an awareness that you exist. And then for me, I think for it to have meaning, it has to be more than an awareness. Like, there's a depth to our consciousness. And what does that mean? Like, I mean, we feel love, we care about things, we have emotions, we have a complex personality and values, and care about other humans and animals. I mean, hopefully, and like some things more than others. And it's a very rich experience to be conscious. And to me, that means something. Because if you're just aware without anything else, like, who cares? Why would you even care if you're conscious or not?
So, it's interesting. You're talking about in this research, not only just the pure research around the brain and consciousness, but also research with psychics and mediums. Did you have any personal experiences yourself with spirituality and the supernatural? For instance, did you have any personal experiences with mediums, with psychics? Did you get any personal experiences that made you feel like the afterlife is real?
Oh my God, so many. I'm also going to say, I'm going to make one adjustment. I don't say the afterlife is real. I think there's a preponderance of evidence that it is the most likely answer, but I cannot say I know for sure.
Very logical and scientific of you to put it that way. That makes sense. So I would love to hear some of those personal.
Many.
Yeah, please tell me.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, so I got to back up a little then. I decided while in the middle of reading everything Dr. Julie Beischel, and I was reading like her quintuple blinded studies, I started reading historic studies. There's a research division called the Society for Cyclical Research, and they're all around. They have the American one, the Scottish one, and they were really big in the 1900s. So I started reading historic studies of psychic mediums, and I was like, what if I got my own medium reading? I'm like, I feel like a crazy person. I can't do that. So I deliberated for so long. And I was like, I gotta do it. So I found a name on the Windbridge website. I was like, it's got to be someone in New York. I'm going to go down the list and pick the first name in New York. Because at that point, I was like, I want it in person. I've changed my mind about this, but at the time I said, I want it in person. I want to watch what they're doing. I want to see what they're not doing. I want to see if they have little earpieces. I want to observe everything.
Yeah.
So I found a name of this one medium, and this is going to like go into like a whole bunch of personal experiences, which is why I'm adding a lot of details to it.
Love it.
Her name's Laura Lynn Jackson. I wrote
Oh
her.
my gosh, Laura Lynn. I'm sorry, I love her work. I haven't met her personally,
amazing.
but like in the mediumship world, like she's legit. Love her. Anyway, go ahead.
I wasn't sure what you knew about me. Okay, yeah, she's amazing. So
yeah.
I'll add then a funny note about her and like, I mean, like, and now they all know I thought this, which is hilarious. I thought she wasn't a real person, and Dr. Julie Beischel wasn't a real person, and like all of them from Windbridge. I was like, you know what I think's going on? And I think that there is some website, like one of those psychic.com websites, and they're hiring actors and like ghostwriters, and they're pretending there's this whole science division behind it. And then when you go to psychic.com, I was like, when you go to, I mean, I wasn't convinced by it, but this was something I thought was possibly going on. And I like dug in to see if this was what was going on. I was like, so when you go to psychic.com or one of those or something like that, one of those big sort of scammy sites, I'm like, they would be like, do you want one of our science ones? And they would just send anyone and pretend it was them, you know, and you wouldn't see them, it'd be on the phone or something. And they're like, it's $50 a minute if you're getting our Windbridge ones. And I was like, and so I just didn't even realize how crazy it was to be that skeptical. So I randomly one day was just talking to Mark Bakutsi, co-founder of Windbridge. I was like, no, it was really thorough. And I kind of casually dropped that I thought that. He didn't react that much. Then I have Dr. Beischel, who like I have admired for I don't know how long. I finally get to meet her. I have her on my podcast. She's like, may I ask you a question? I was like, sure. She's like, did you think I was a fake person and a bot? I was like, oh God, yes, I did. So that is my funny story about, I mean, amongst others, Laura Lynn Jackson. So once I realized she was a human being,
real person,
a real person, I reached, I found her on Windbridge. Then I reached out to a scientist, Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell, who also gave me Laura's name. So I was like, oh, okay, gotta book with this woman. I like give a VPN, hide my identity. Like, love it. Everything. I did use my first real name because in Dr. Beischel's studies, they used real first names. I was like, okay, I probably have to do that. But Liz, how common. Everything else, like fake last name, fake everything, get on a wait list. And I'm like, it's going to be a long wait list. So I was like, oh my God, like this must be how long it is to get wait for Windbridge mediums. So in the meantime, coincidentally, my mom, who thinks this is all, am I allowed to swear or no?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Okay. No problem.
My mom thinks this is all the biggest bunch of bullshit in the world. So I go with her to like a book reading that someone had written about one of her colleagues who passed away, and his wife was there, and she's like, you wouldn't believe it, he's been visiting me all the time. I went to this medium. My mom's like, oh, here we go, this crazy shit again. And my daughter, and I'm like, oh. She's like, oh, this is all I've been fucking hearing about for the past like
medium this,
4
medium
months.
that.
Yeah, and she thinks it's crazy. So I get the name of this medium from the woman. Go to this medium. She knew stuff she could not have known. Just could not have known. I was like, what is going on? I can't believe this. And then in the meantime, I went to one of Laura's workshops. That woman, like, if someone could win a medal for patience, like, she deserves it. I'm there. I'm like, but it's a string. I'm like, every minute, she's like, I raised my hand every 2 minutes and was like, right, but how would this tie in with physics? And then she was so sweet. And I wrote her an email afterwards and was like, do you know any groups like Windbridge where I could volunteer in the research, but in New York or LA? And she said, try Forever Family Foundation. And that was like the next level, because I met my mentor, who has sadly since passed, Fran Ginsberg, and Bob Ginsberg, her husband, who were like second parents to me. And they, similar to me, secular Jews. Fran was a little more open to it than Bob. And their daughter, Bailey Ginsberg, passed in 2002. I feel horrible forgetting if it was 01 or 02, but She and I'd be about the
Yeah.
same age now. She passed in an
Oh, wow.
accident, and they
Mhm.
started a foundation that researched the science of afterlife and certified psychic
Mm.
mediums. So I started volunteering there, and that was like personal experience after personal experience,
Yeah.
life changing.
Oh. Wow. I am blown away that you, first of all, decided to dive in and actually try to experience psychic mediumship from, being a sitter. Because a lot of people would have just, said this is stupid and not even decided to try it. But the fact that you did it, but also decided to do it so scientifically by, hiding your identity and making sure that the person couldn't know things about you.
Right.
I love that. I talk about it on my show every once in a while that I'm also a medium. I do mediumship every once in a while. I've been developing in it for a long time. And the thing that I always tell people is if you want to see real mediumship, go to a development circle. If you go to a development circle, you'll see how mediums learn to develop their gifts, and you'll see people who don't know each other picking up and on spirit. So I really commend you for just being brave and being willing to even just see if it's real or not. I
Thank
really appreciate it.
you.
Absolutely.
Oh,
So
thank you.
this story is phenomenal. So you go to these mediums, you see that they're able to pick up on things that they shouldn't know about your father.
And other
As
things, my
you
grandmother
and
and
other
just, yeah.
people, yeah, and other
Mhm.
people in your life. So at that point, and I love the way you phrased it earlier, that you think the afterlife is a possibility, or one of the best
Probability.
possibility. It's a
Mhm.
probability. So what do you think the other probability could be if it's not an afterlife? How could they grab that information? Do you think it's for like psychically? Do you think it could potentially be information that's floating around us? How do you think that information could come through?
So I no longer think cheating because
Yeah.
of this group of mediums I've gotten to know
Yeah.
so well. I'm
Yeah.
convinced they're not cheating. And I've
Yeah.
seen experimental data such as, you know, Dr. Jeff Tarrant, neuroscientist who studies psychic mediums' brains, and he studied
Hmm.
Laura's brain, Rebecca Ann Lowe Cicero, Janet Mayer, Angela and
Hmm.
Diana, Joanne Gerber, like the best
Hmm.
scientifically studied mediums. And I think that, well, one of the theories, and I don't think this is it, but one of the theories is super psi. And I don't know if you
Mm.
know do you know super psi, or your listeners?
I have not heard that term before. You'll have to tell me.
That is that there's a huge bank of consciousness, and
Yeah.
that they can just tap into anything. I
Yeah.
think it's a possibility, but I think survival, I think it's possible, but I think survival's more likely than super psi. And
Mhm.
then there's a third option, and I think this could be um that there's something physics hasn't discovered yet that will
Right.
explain all of this.
Yeah.
And also, is the afterlife temporary? Does it last
Mhm.
300 years and then our consciousness is wiped out? We don't know. I mean, that doesn't seem that great either. I mean, better than, whatever time we get here.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think those are the most likely, but I guess if I could put it in order, I would think most likely survival, second
Yeah.
most likely physics, some answer we don't know, third
Mhm.
most likely super psi.
Yeah.
And I actually asked a podcast guest I had on recently, Ben
Mhm.
Sinclair, host of Unraveling the Universe. He has a
Mhm.
great podcast too. Anyone I think would love it who is
Mhm.
interested in your podcast. And he said that he thinks it might be a combination of all three of these.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? Yes, that is probably the answer. It's probably a
Yeah.
combination, but then combination's fine as long as there's survival.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting. The super psi, I haven't heard that term, but that sounds almost similar to the idea of like a collective unconscious, or there's some like I've heard things that sound similar to that. And experiencing it myself, I've always wondered, why is this possible? I was the most reluctant medium. I kind of fell into mediumship accidentally. It's a wild story, but I ended up just kind of going to a spiritualist church and realizing that I could feel when spirit came in. And I still, to this day, because I believe in science, so I would love to know, like, why is it even possible for us to do this? Why is it possible for me to connect to somebody and say, okay, your great grandma's here and she showing me that she used to make wine, and that person says, oh, I don't know about that, and then they ask their grandmother and they say, oh my god, great grandma used to make wine. Why is that possible? I don't know. So as you were continuing on this journey, it sounds almost like this afterlife research, from what I could see from your work, has kind of become almost like a calling for you, because I see that you have conversations with people around this work. I heard you were volunteering. Like, I would love to hear more about just like where you want this research to go. What more would you like to discover in this?
Where I want it to go. I mean, I would like
Yeah.
irrefutable proof that we
Yeah.
survive conscious as ourselves as individuals eternally. You know,
Yeah.
that would be my dream. Does that mean
Yeah.
it's true?
Yeah.
I have no idea. No, I hope so. But
Yeah.
what I would like for this research, I want it taken a lot more seriously. I want the
Yeah.
stigma removed. A lot more
Mhm.
funding put into it. Serious scientists. I mean, serious scientists are studying it, but
Mhm.
you know, then they start getting called no longer serious scientists, unfortunately, once they start studying it.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
a lot more funding taken really seriously, you know, peer reviewed by top level scientists, neuroscientists to start studying it. I think
Yeah.
it's fine if they think, well, the answer is not survival,
Mhm.
but that there's something worth investigating, and at least don't deny that this anomalous data is coming in. So I
Yeah.
would love just a lot of research to be put
Yeah.
into this
Yeah.
and to have it respected rather than mocked. And
Yeah. I love that.
interestingly,
Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, there apparently are some really big scientists. Like, for example, I met a ghost hunter, and he said a really, really big scientist was
Mm.
one of the ghost hunts, actually two big scientists at
Yeah.
different times. They were like, yeah, we see it related to energy. We get what you're talking
Mhm.
about. This could be possible. But they're like, you
Yeah.
can never tell anyone our names or that we were here because we will be
Mhm.
ridiculed. We could risk losing funding.
Mhm. Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate you bringing that up, because I've heard other people say this as well, is that for some reason the science community, and I know that that's literally millions of people, but for lack of a better term, the science community for some reason doesn't want to really research anything that goes into the quote unquote supernatural, paranormal, spiritual. That's kind of relegated to this own kind of other corner of science research that's really just kind of talking about yoga and breath work and why it's good for the body, but won't go into these type of subjects for whatever reason. Do you have an idea of why that is? Like, why is there such a stigma around this?
whew. So I feel very lost on this. So I can only quote what other people have said to
Sure.
me. So
Sure.
I've gotten different answers. Some, first of all, it's just the fear that behind closed doors, they say really different things. They're a lot
Yeah.
more open. They're a lot more curious, but they don't want to be ridiculed. They don't want to lose
Mm,
their funding. They want to get, tenure if they're professors. They want to
yeah.
they stop being taken so seriously. That's one issue. And then, once
Yeah.
that stigma stays, who wants to be the one to break it? The few that have broken it, then
Mm-hmm.
they're not taken as seriously by their community, or,
Yeah.
they have to fight in certain ways. I can't remember which one, but there's one
Mm.
neuroscientist studying this, and pardon me,
Mm-hmm.
they tried to they tried to block him from presenting at a big conference. Luckily, his community stood behind him and fought
Yeah.
for him. But that not everyone has that luck. Another
Yeah.
issue, and I can kind of agree with this, is it's been
Mm.
unfortunately so tied into religion. And again, I have no problem with
Mm-hmm.
religion, but
Mm-hmm.
if you look at history, and we have evolved, we probably have a lot of survival instincts in our brain, and you look at a lot of the history of religion, like burning witches, burning, mediums. There's probably an innate
Mm-hmm.
fear,
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
also a lot of religion is still unfortunately causing harm today. It's also doing wonderful stuff, but
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, a religious minority are passing laws
Mm-hmm.
that are very draconian. So I think
Yes.
there's some, yeah, even in United
Mm-hmm.
States, which is supposed to be separation of church and state, they're still
Right.
passing draconian laws and trying to pass more based on religion.
Yeah.
And I think also that's part of it. And then I think, like, yeah, so much is this topic. It gets very
Mm-hmm.
mixed with, as you were saying, like,
Mm-hmm.
a certain type of spirituality that's very belief based and very, I mean, I've seen that bring a lot of joy and comfort and healing and depth to people's lives,
Mm-hmm.
but there isn't evidence and they conflate
Mm-hmm.
the two way too
Mm-hmm.
much. So I think those
Yeah.
are all the reasons I can see for now. And,
Yeah.
and also I think it's a history of a lot of things that were really ridiculed end up becoming taken
Yeah.
seriously. A lot that was ridiculed is not, but let the science, but anything that
Mm-hmm.
has science behind it ends up
Yeah.
in general. Sorry again. I think in
Mm-hmm.
general ends up being taken, seriously in the end, but it's still a long time of ridicule.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate your perspective on that. And I think you're absolutely right. I agree with you just about how, I mean, we talked about separation in church and state, you were saying, like I am a huge proponent of that. And we are still struggling with that in the United States, as a lot of people know. And I think, I don't know if you know this, but a lot of the people who watch this show are basically ex-religious people who are still interested in spirituality. So I'm very big on always making sure people understand there's a difference between being religious and being spiritual. And you're showing that there is, you can be an atheist and be interested in exploring these topics, which I really, really appreciate. Another question for you that just popped in my head. So as you were going through this research, was there anything that, is in the supernatural or paranormal that you found to be bunk, that you found to be like this
Oh
is
yeah.
there's no evidence for this?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Not everything, but well, I mean, some mediums are just. I saw plenty of ones that had no idea what they were doing. I think some
Yeah.
were very kind and
Yeah.
honest hearted, and
Yeah.
they would be like, "Oh, I see angels around you." I mean, I haven't seen anything that like would make me believe in angels.
Right,
I
right,
mean,
right, right,
whatever,
right.
however you
Yeah.
define that.
Yeah.
There, I mean, there were. I wouldn't say there was a specific phenomena that I'm like 100% that's not true, but like the
Mm-hmm.
interpretation again, because angels maybe they just mean like a discarnate consciousness. Someone who's passed
Mm-hmm.
away who's like a lot smarter and more advanced than someone else who. I
Right.
don't know. Like you'd have to define angel. It's not a defined word. But
Yeah.
yeah, I've seen plenty of mediums. And then I went and saw, yeah, and then among some of them, there was definitely one that I would say was a fraud
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
readers. A lot I think were just believing
Mm-hmm.
it was kind of like a religious approach to it. One was a dead
Yeah.
fraud, I'm 90% sure. I
Mm-hmm.
saw a physical medium host a seance, and
Boy.
it was like a carnival show. He was
Yeah.
such a fraud.
Oh,
Such a
I
fraud.
afterwards we'll have to offline I'll share my story of a fraud physical medium to see
Ooh,
if maybe we know
wonderful.
the same person, but yeah.
I wonder.
Anyways.
Oh, I'm excited to talk
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, I can't spill the tea on the show, but
No,
anyway.
no.
So
I don't
you
give his
saw.
name in my book. I call him Sans Medium,
Yeah,
so.
I do the same thing. I kind of speak about it in generalities. So you went to a
Yeah.
fake seance, and you said I've run across fraud mediums as well, and people that either weren't good at reading or had a different interpretation.
Right.
Anything else? Has anything else come up that you're like, oh, this is just not even close to true?
It's so hard to say because I think a lot of times it's the language. Again,
Yeah,
like
is
angels around
limiting.
you and demons. I'm like, well,
Yeah,
I will never take those words seriously. But again, you could
yeah,
mean a demon could mean like a spirit of Hitler who's still like if it's this carnate consciousness who's
yeah,
still trying to cause harm and hasn't gotten it together.
yeah,
Who knows if someone like him ever does, maybe in a trillion years, if consciousness is
yeah.
I'm trying to think of some of the I think it's more I can't say like this phenomena across the board is not possible. I think the
Mm-hmm.
extent to which they claim it's possible, because I do think physical mediumship is possible, but the extent to which this
Yeah,
physical medium made it happen, no, I don't believe that. So I think
yeah,
extent interpretations,
yeah.
but yeah, I think physical mediumship is possible. I haven't researched him yet, but I've heard really good things about Stuart Alexander.
I know the
I
name. Okay.
Oh, he's fascinating. I mean, Leslie
Yeah,
Kane, if you know
yeah,
her,
yeah,
has concluded that he's genuine, then I trust her. It doesn't mean for a fact he's genuine, but I think it's highly
mm,
likely. I really, really trust her. I've been to Spoon, so that's physical. That's
yeah,
physically impacting using energy to physically impact stuff, which really is what physical mediumship is. Yes, I can't say that it's a phenomenon across the board as much as interpretations and the extent of claims to it.
Yeah.
So I mean, this physical medium, he was like, oh my God, it was just ridiculous. It was so funny. He had like
puppetry.
Like he was like roaring in the background and like saying he was being taken over and that like he could levitate people, and I mean, it was just crazy. Well, like people lifted chairs like disguised in like costumes in the back. I'm like, they're clearly just wearing all black so we can't see them. And he's like, and you can't turn around because that will make them disappear. I'm like, of course I can't turn around while my chair
so
is being
convenient.
shaken.
So convenient. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. A lot of the things that you're bringing up are things that are talked about in spiritual circles and circles where people believe in God and angels, and these are common conversations. Like what you're saying about angels and demons. I could talk to 10 of my friends and say, what's an angel? What's a demon? And some of them will say, those are just words that we're using to describe other things. I've heard some people say, oh, an angel is literally almost just like a program or a frequency. I know people who believe that angels are literally kind of what Christianity or Judaism would say an angel is. Nobody can give you one definition on this. So I think it's interesting that you're kind of experiencing the same thing when you talk to people about what they're seeing when they do mediumship or psychic work, and there's really not one common interpretation for all of this. It sounds like you experience that as well.
And it's just how you define it based on your culture. Like, have you heard of Dr. Melvin Morse?
The name sounds familiar, but you'd have to tell me about his work.
So he researches near-death experiences in children, and he shares a story, and it just shows how, like, which has helped me not dismiss it. If someone's like, I had a near-death experience, I saw God and an angel, I'm like, okay, describe what that's like, because that's just the language they're using. That doesn't, in the beginning, I would hear that and be terrified and be like, oh, I'm dismissing all of this. That's not true if they're talking about God. But again, it's the language of your culture. He talked about a little boy who had a near-death experience, and he's like, I went to the other side and there was a wizard there. And then a year later, the little boy said Jesus was there. He changed it to Jesus. So as a little kid, he interpreted what he saw, probably based on cartoons or birthday parties, whatever, as a wizard. Then I'm sure all the adults were like, oh, no, it was Jesus. And he was like, oh, okay, it was Jesus. And it was probably his great-great-grandfather, maybe, a man with a beard who was like, gave him a hug. I mean, maybe,
Yeah.
So to me, that's just, I think, a very clear example of how there isn't a standard, logical, acceptable language for this. And most people are raised in religion. So, and if you haven't studied this, I mean, who knows if like before I researched this, I had a near-death experience and I felt this light and loving being. If, the only word I might know is God, and be like, well, I don't believe in God, but the best thing I can say is God. I don't know what that was,
Yeah, well, that's kind of what makes you kind of a perfect person to be really digging into this, because you don't have all of those layers of religious programming that a lot of us do. I mean, I find even though I'm not religious, I sometimes use some of that language because it's just the easiest language for me to grab. I don't really have better language to touch on, but you growing up in a secular, ish environment, you can you don't have those filters.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess when I hear those words, it makes me not take it seriously. I mean, I've since grown past that, as I said, and been like, okay, what does that mean to you? But
I love that. So tell us about some of the work you're doing now and how people can get involved in this work.
So I am still doing a lot with it. I wrote one book. I have a second one coming out just about my experiences. I volunteer with the Forever Family Foundation, which is, you mentioned Laura Lynn Jackson, who's one of the best mediums in the world. She introduced me to them and certified by them. And there are other amazing mediums certified by them. And great scientists like Dr. Jim Tucker is on the board. And I volunteer with them. They do grief retreats every year, 4 of them. I still get medium readings. I have a podcast now where I get to sit and ask a million questions of all these people who fascinate me, which is my dream, just to be like, you have
Love
to
it.
sit with me for an hour and a half, and I get to ask you anything I want. Yeah, my second book should be coming out hopefully in April.
Yeah.
And yeah, just still meeting the people. I go to conferences. I've gone to the IANS, International Association for Near-Death Studies, the SSE, Society for Scientific Exploration. Go to as many conferences as I can. Just keep learning and meeting the people. And so many of the people, what's so surprising is really the ones doing the best research are really normal. And just which changes. And some of the best mediums, they're so normal. They're just like hang out with anyone else. That was life-changing for me to learn that too.
I love it. I love it. And what's your website so people can find you?
Oh, okay. WTFJustHappened.net. And my book is called WTF Just Happened, A Sciencey Skeptic Explores Grief, Healing, and Evidence of the Afterlife. And my podcast is WTF Just Happened, all about the afterlife, no woo. And I'm also hosting science and spirituality dinners, or salons, I should say. They're not dinners. They're either in person or virtual. And I give a talk on the science, and a medium will give readings. So you can also go to my website and learn a little about those.
That is awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, Liz. I learned so much.
You.
You gave me so much to research now too, which is, I'm going to go down like a million rabbit holes.
Oh my God. Please do reach out. I want to hear what you think of anything, or if you have questions. Any of the listening too, reach out anytime. I love talking to people. I'm very active on Instagram and TikTok, email. Yeah, please reach out to me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Highly Spiritual Person podcast. I really hope you found this conversation inspiring and uplifting. If you did, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more updates. And remember, sharing is caring, so if you think others would benefit from this content, don't hesitate to share it with your friends and family. We'll be back with more exciting content, so stay tuned and stay curious.